I'd like to call the August 1st meeting of the Gloucester County Board of Supervisors to order. Ms. Steele, will you call the roll?
Mr. Gibson? Here. Dr. Orth? Here. Mr. Smith? Here. Mr. Hutson?
Here.
Mr. Chriscoe?
Here.
Mr. Hedrick?
Here.
Mr. Bazzani?
Here.
All present.
If it all would join for the invocation by the Father Gregory Kant of the Church of St. Therese.
I invite you all to pray with me if you wish. Loving God, make me more teachable. Help me to pay closer attention to the world around and inside of me. Help me to look beneath surfaces and beyond appearances. Lead me to reflect on my experiences. May I heed Jesus' words every day. Look, listen, take care, remember, watch, pray. Coax me to be more open to life despite the possibility of pain, knowing that life's greatest lessons often entail some form of suffering. And finally, God, give me a positive attitude toward all the mistakes I make. Help me to see them not as roadblocks to perfection, but as stepping stones to greater humility and compassion. Every time I trip or stumble, tumble or fall, may I pick myself up with your help and continue on my journey toward you. And Lord, we pray that all of our deliberations and decisions tonight in this board meeting will be to promote the common good. Amen.
Amen. Join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next item is approval of the minutes from March 22nd.
So moved. Second.
All in favor? Aye. Next item is adoption of the agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Approval of, there's no consent agenda. We'll go to matters presented to the board. Anything? Okay. Next is the county administrator items, who happens to be having a birthday today. Happy birthday, Carol.
I'd rather not be anywhere else but here, right? I was wined and dined earlier, so it's great. I am very pleased to announce that through our community rating system, our CRS system, that we received our official news so that the people who qualify or have to have flood insurance after October 1st, they will be receiving a 25% discount as we achieve the Class 5 rating. So very, very good help to the people in their community. I also wanted to mention that today is the new superintendent's first day officially, and I had a wonderful meeting with Dr. Anthony Vladu this afternoon, and I look forward to working with him, and I know you all will too. And that's it. Thank you.
Next item is scheduled presentations. Quarterly update from VDOT, Mr. McKnight.
Okay, good evening. I got quite a long one here. There's been a little bit of work going on in Gloucester. I don't know if everyone's noticed or not. Just to hit on the first project here that I wanted to mention, Route 619 Fiddler's Green, the right turn lane, that project is nearing completion. It's been paved out. There's some miscellaneous pending striping and the loops for the detection of the vehicles need to be cut in. But other than that, that project is mostly complete. They will be evaluating the sight distance for the removal of the no turn on red sign there.
How is that different now than it was before when you could make that right turn on red? And then they added a crosswalk for a few years. And now here we are with a dedicated right turn lane with a no right turn on red that we've been able to turn right on red for since they put the stoplight in, and now all of a sudden the sight line's an issue.
Sure. They just need to identify where the stop bar is going to be for the right turn, because it's going to be staggered from the through lane. And as long as there's not an issue with the sight lines, there's a cabinet right there if you're looking to your right. So as long as they're able to see the pedestrians crossing at the crosswalk location, it shouldn't be an issue. But either way, that no turn on right, whether it's just removed completely or they install a special sign that when the button is pressed, when a pedestrian is present, that will be the only time that the no right on red will be displayed. Otherwise, they'll be able to make the right on red any other time. So, does that answer your question, Mr. Chriscoe?
Yeah, sort of. That's fine.
Okay. I do want to send out a special thanks to the county staff on this one. There's been a lot of coordination with Dominion, with the state police, with of the food line owners, so it was a lot of coordination. That portion by the food line, by the way, is underway and should be complete here shortly as well. A lot of work there. I think it's going to make a big difference, especially for the folks coming out of Fiddler's Green. So excited to get that project completed. Next project I wanted to mention is the Route 17 paving from Crew Road to the Coleman Bridge. That's a big one. That's all night work, by the way. It's just so busy down there. That work is nearing completion. They're estimating hopefully by the end of next week that should be all paved out, and we'll just have the miscellaneous striping and loops insertions. But other than that, they should be all paved out by next Friday, weather dependent. Route 216 Guinea Road, lots of work been going on Guinea Road, Mr. Bazzani, I know. And just a really quick explanation of what's going on down there. The way I like to explain it, instead of just putting a Band-Aid on a problem, that road was identified as a good candidate for what's known as a full depth reclamation, where they actually go down to the subgrade and reconstruct the entire road from the base up. And that really, one of the issues we were seeing on Guinea Road, especially in the lane coming out of Guinea, where all the trucks are loaded, there was a lot of load distress rating issues in that lane, in particular, base failures. So instead of just slapping a Band-Aid on that road, we got special funding to go in there and reconstruct it. So I really appreciate the patience. I know that's been a very, very frustrating experience for those folks down there. And hopefully that road should be topped out, by the way, by the end of next week as well. So we should be out of there with paving on Guinea Road. They still will have to come and do miscellaneous striping and that sort of thing and some of the turn lanes, but the majority of the paving should be done on Guinea Road by the end of next week.
I'm thinking that some of the striping was done by a guy that just came off a Saturday night party.
Yeah, all that's temporary. Yeah, we're coming back, I promise. There's multitudes of paving going on throughout the county. I won't mention every single route. It's quite long, as you can see. But there's a lot of paving going on in Gloucester, a lot of resurfacing. So lots of work going on in that regard in Gloucester County. Some construction yes, sir.
So when you say Cape Seal, for the people that are watching, just describe what's going on with these roads, because I think all of us get calls from people about their secondary roads have holes with little patches of stuff. And so also when you do that, can you put the names of the roads instead of route numbers?
Sure. Okay. So Cape Seal, that's a great question. Essentially what that is they surface treat, or what we call shoot road, with tar and gravel. And then they come back, there's a curing period of about 2 weeks where traffic has to run on that road and actually beat that gravel more into the road itself. That helps the makes the road more substantial. After that, they come back with what's known as a slurry seal, and they cover the surface treatment and that tar and gravel up with a slurry seal. So you can see this in Holly Springs, for example. They just completed that subdivision with Cape Seal. Sawgrass Point was completed last year, I believe. So it actually is it looks like an asphalt. It's not, but it does look like an asphalt, the finished product, a little bit more so.
How do you determine which roads are in that loop of what you just talked about? Because you have a lot of roads there. How is that determined? If I get a call from someone and said, look, I see all these roads getting, Cape sealed, my road isn't even on it, and it's just as bad.
Yeah, so some roads are, if they structurally just can't, you need to have a good structural road before you put Cape seal. Anything, if it's not structurally sound, the Cape seal is nothing more than a Band-Aid, essentially. So you really need to, it's important to pick the correct roads, the ones that structurally are still in pretty decent shape, but they need to be sealed up and could stand a little bit more structure. So it's a good product for those types of roads. We've used it on Route 14 in Matthews, Route 14 in King and Queen, so some higher volume primary roads with great success.
So if we get calls from a constituent, do we just tell you the road so maybe you can take a look at it?
Sure.
I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
That'd be fun. Any other paving questions? Okay. Some construction projects that I did want to highlight in the next 24 months that are coming up here. The Route 17 and Guinea Road intersection improvement project, that bid was rejected and had to be re-advertised. The bidder was found non-responsive, so they had to re-advertise that as opposed to awarding it to a bidder that was not responsible in that regard. So that should be awarded here shortly. 636 Providence Road, the right turn lane, that's set to begin in spring of 2024 by state forces. And then Belleville, the rural rustic in down Guinea. I think that's Bonneville, sorry. Bonneville Road is all set to begin next summer as well. Some exciting news that I did want to mention, the Glenn's intersection improvement project that was submitted through Smart Scale has been added. PE has actually been accelerated on that. PE meaning preliminary engineering has been accelerated to start in 2023, so that's exciting. They've going to get that project rolling a little bit sooner than expected. Some supervisor requests that I did want to hit on a little bit. Mr. Gibson requested an update on Woods Crossroads. You may have seen some survey crews out at Woods Crossroads in the last week or so. They have been surveying Woods Crossroads. We have put in for grants through the HSIP program, which stands for Highway Safety Improvement Program, and the HRRR program, which stands for High Risk Rural Roads, for funding of a safety project at that intersection, and decided to go ahead and get the survey of that intersection out of the way. Regardless of what happens there, it's going to need to be surveyed before any safety project happens. So just to get that ball rolling a little bit faster, and get whatever is funded. No funding has been identified at this time yet. We're hopeful that it will be, but as of right now, there's no funding that has been identified. You have any questions about that one?
I've got lots of questions.
Okay.
I'm going to put them all together once you finish your presentation.
Sure. Harcum Road and Deep Point Lane, that is on the resurfacing schedule for surface treatment. I know it didn't make this report. That was a late addition, but it is on the resurfacing schedule and will be completed by the summer. And then we've already spoken about Harcum Road and the speed study. We'll touch base with the county police department on that one. Mr. Hendricks, I did speak with the citizen on Indian Road, and Indian Road is on the trimming schedule, so we'll go ahead and get the whole route trimmed on Indian Road, so that's good news there. And just some really quick maintenance highlights before you ask some questions. Second cycle of primary mowing has been complete. I think they've done a fabulous job. Hopefully the rain kind of subsides a little bit. I know the farmers are very happy about it, but it definitely makes the grass grow quickly. The third cycle of mowing is expected to begin late August, early September, weather depending. We'll keep an eye on the weather and see how much it rains and how much the grass grows, and we can adjust as needed. The first cycle of secondary mowing has been completed as well, and same thing with that. With the remaining month of August, we'll keep an eye on it and adjust as needed. I did want to just highlight a little bit, Route 17 shoulder repair. One of the things that I'm pretty passionate about is when we pave out a road at the end of that process, I want it to be a brand new road. So our area headquarters are going in front of a lot of these paving schedules, pulling shoulders, digging out ditches, blowing out pipes. It's a pretty big point of emphasis for me, because the last thing I want is to pave a brand new road and then have to go dig into it and replace a pipe or have water sitting on it, and just, that's something that I don't want to see. So they have been working pretty extensively on 17, or they should have completed the majority of that. You'll be seeing a lot of pipe washing, ditching, and shoulder pulling across the county this summer and into the fall. We have ordered an additional state-run pipe washing truck, so we have one more than we normally do. In addition, we've written a contract for a pipe washing truck, so that will be running around. That's self-contained by the contractor, and that'll be running around cleaning out pipes. In addition, we have a contractor that will be in Gloucester specifically working on ditching and pipe washing. So they're an all-inclusive group. That's just to augment our state forces, just to help us to get ahead of some of this, the drainage issues that we've had with all this rain. Yes, sir.
Mr. McKnight, thank you. Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. Permission, are you going to concentrate your efforts in the Guinea area?
With the contractor, yes, sir. So, Marius Road, Mundy's Creek Road, yes, sir. Those are two of the big, and the contractor will be down there pretty much exclusively with their pipe washing truck and their Gradle and their dump trucks to help load that material away. But it's not the only place that will be. There's locations along 17 in the northern part of the county that our state forces will be concentrating on. But yes, Guinea Road is definitely a big point of emphasis for us this summer and into the fall.
Thank you.
And with that, I will be happy to answer any questions that y'all may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. McKnight, for your presentation. I appreciate all the projects that are in the works. Just a couple follow-up questions. So regarding Harcum Road and Deep Point Lane, you mentioned that was not in your handout regarding resurfacing routes for 2023, but I believe what you said was that it is on the schedule to be resurfaced?
Yes, sir.
And when is the estimated date of completion?
I can't give you an exact, but it will be by the end of summer.
This summer?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
This summer.
Great. And one of the things that we had talked about before the meeting and in the email, I mentioned I had attended the Piankatank Community League meeting with Lieutenant Jason Klink and lots of members from the community. There's a real concern about speeding on Harcum Road. There's a boat ramp at the end of Deep Point Lane, and lots of heavy traffic during the summer, and unfortunately some speeding issues, and they are hopeful to get the speed limit reduced for that road. And I know that Lieutenant Klink has collected some speed data, and so I know he wants to share that with you, and hopes to have VDOT conduct a speed assessment to see if that can be addressed. Okay. Next topic is Walker Avenue. I don't see that on your list either, but I know that has been scheduled twice for paving. And
yes, that's asphalt.
Asphalt.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So that's scheduled to begin here shortly.
All right. And so as you're aware, that's where Sanders Assisted Living, Independent, Rehab are there. It's been scheduled twice, it's been canceled twice, it was supposed to start tomorrow, and I'm hopeful that the third time is going to be a charm, because it's very stressful for the elderly residents who happen to still have cars to move the cars, make those arrangements, only to have it be canceled at the last minute. So if that can be pressed and the next time it's scheduled, make it happen, because that's a very stressful process for folks living there.
Understood.
My last question is on Woods Crossroad, and you're seeking funding. What is the funding for? Is it for an R cut, or is it for a traffic light? And depending on the project, when would be the estimated start of work on that project?
Well, the preferred option is still the restricted U-turn crossing application. Again, that has not been awarded, no funding. There is no funding as of right now. We have applied for funding, but yes, the R-cut is the preferred option. In terms of timing, I can't give you, it really depends when the funding is, if it is approved. Like I said, we're trying to get a lot of this preliminary stuff out of the way so that we could hit the ground running and expedite it even more. But I can't give you an exact date right now.
Okay. I know many of the citizens who own property around that intersection are very, very concerned about eminent domain and the taking of property to pursue this project. So I just would encourage you to work with those property owners as best you can to address their concerns. And I would, of course, prefer the traffic light option and would encourage you to reconsider the VDOT's decision, but I understand what your position is. So thank you.
Yeah, regarding the speeding, I brought up an issue with Ms. Steele from a constituent regarding speed bumps. And Ms. Steele said that she was going to try to put this on the agenda for our September working group, because I think all of us have probably seen people speeding at rates much higher than posted, and especially in subdivisions where there's a lot of kids. So I think you're going to schedule that as to the process that we would need to deal with regarding requests for speed bumps.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Chair. Yes, we've gotten information from VDOT and coordinating, and Trish is working on this too, so that we can kind of educate everybody all at the same time. You may have citizens call and request, how do we go about this? And there's some expense that the county has to bear. So we're going to go over all that and make sure everybody knows what that process involves.
By the way, I apologize. I misspoke. You'd have the road names on there. I was glad.
It's something to think about with speed bumps, just from a VDOT perspective and a maintenance perspective. They do cause issues with drainage at times, and then especially if we have snow, you can't see them. So they definitely cause issues with our snow plows, tearing them out of the pavement, tearing the snow plow up. So it's just something to consider.
I think those are the types of things that, as we discuss the idea of speed bumps, all those things would have to be in the process. So that, again, we all live on roads where people are going much higher than the posted 25, especially in areas with kids.
Yes, sir.
To follow up Mr. Gibson's comments on Woods Crossroads, so you heard the multitude of citizens who did not want that in there. And have you communicated that back to your office to say, we've got a lot of citizens don't want this? And they're going to say, did they say, and I don't want to impugn your integrity, but did they basically say, the heck with them, we're going to put it in anyway, and that's why you're leaning towards putting an R-cut in?
I think we all agree that something needs to happen at this intersection. I myself just had a very close friend that was hit at that intersection, the most recent accident. So I'm very aware of this intersection. My family drives this intersection. My wife and my kids drive through this intersection. So I think at the end of the day, we all agree that something needs to happen from a safety perspective, and that's the most important part of this project.
Okay.
Anyone else for Mr. Knight? Item on the agenda tonight is citizen comment period. Any citizen would like to speak, come up and state your name and magisterial district. You have 3 minutes.
My name is Diane Jones. I'm in the Ware district, and I got a letter from VDOT regarding a sidewalk on Warehouse Road. I guess the person who decided to put a sidewalk on Warehouse Road has never driven down Warehouse Road. My house, the part where they dug a ditch in front of my house, which 36 years ago and for several years was no ditch, and I could ride my riding mower along and keep my yard trimmed nicely. But now I can't do the weed whacker anymore. And so the front of my yard looks like the side of a river or something, because I can't deal with the grass. They said it's for flooding. I've lived in the house 36 years through 2 hurricanes. My yard has never flooded. But anyway, there's no room. There are 2 80-foot trees on the edge of my property that would have to be removed to put a sidewalk. The across the street property has a fence right on the county line. And down the street, people have trees, fences, landscaping. There is no room for a sidewalk. They do shut the street down when they have the however long run on Daffodil Festival, and that works fine. Also, I've had to redirect a couple of youth gangs that like to walk through people's property and roam the streets at night and disperse them. And a sidewalk would only encourage that sort of behavior. And I guess so anyway, the answer is no. The long answer is heck no on the sidewalk. I know friends who live in the Woods Crossroads area who have trailers, horse trailers and tractor trailers. And one of those things like they have in front of Goodfellows would not work for them if they have to travel on the road. So I don't know what you're going to do about that, but I'm hoping that that will not be the case. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak?
Good evening, everyone. My name's Charles Reckerts. I live in the Ware district, and I just wanted to come up tonight to make 3 kind of points. Unfortunately, I wasn't here last month when you guys made a decision to sell the property down at the corner of Providence Road. But I just wanted to kind of share some pretty important facts for you guys to help me maybe help you think through the other 2 points I wanted to mention. And that is that you guys approved the sale of that property for $275,000. It was 5 acres of land, and with about 20 minutes of research, you could find out that just 2 signals up the road north of it, property was sold that was 3/4 of an acre for $700,000. And the adjacent property next to that on the same corner is for sale for $1.6 million, and it's 2 acres, and that property is under contract. So the person that you guys sold that property to purchased 2.5 acres adjacent to it for $290,000. So I think you guys left a lot of money on the table. And I'm not here to be critical, but I'm not sure where you're getting your real estate advice from, but I would probably look in other directions. Because we're talking about how we want to raise taxes, and, you know, I would predict you potentially left at least $500,000 or even $1 million on the table with that property. Which brings me to my second point, and that is there's two proposals on the agenda today that are of extreme significance, and one being selling our utilities department via PPEA. And I think that's a significant thing that's going to take a lot of time to vet, and probably needs to get consultants involved that aren't on staff here in Gloucester County, given the magnitude of that within itself. And then the last thing is the sale of Page Middle School. I noticed was on the agenda, and it has been for some time. And I'm sure it's not going to be long before you have somebody who's ready to, sell or want to buy that property from you. And I'm all for that. But be careful with respect to these proposals, because you guys you can leave money on the table and potentially affect infrastructure issues and things many, many, many years down the road by whatever these proposals are. And I would just urge caution with both these things that are on your agenda tonight, using the example I first cited with that sale of that property down on the corner. So with that, I appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mr. Rickards. Would anyone else like to speak? Okay, we'll close the citizen comment period. There no calls. No. There are no public hearings. We'll move to the regular agenda.
Mr. Chair, may I?
Yes, sir.
I know we don't typically respond to citizens who have come to speak, but the last speaker seemed to indicate that the sale had already happened. It has not happened. As you will recall, the board passed a resolution authorizing conveyance, but I carefully word those resolutions to authorize rather than direct. So I'm working on the conveyance of that property, so if you all want to stop it, you may before it's done.
Thank you. First item on the regular agenda is an application for tax exemption by designation from the Gloucester Matthews Care Clinic and request for a public hearing. Ms. Steele.
Yes, thank you. So, as you just stated, the Gloucester Matthews Care Clinic has asked for a real estate tax exemption that would begin next January for the calendar year 2024. In accordance with our policies, we've gone through and the application has been deemed complete and eligible for consideration. So it's being brought to the board tonight. If you would like to proceed, the next step would be to move forward with a public hearing. And the executive director, Arlene Armenter, is here if you have any questions for her.
Does anyone have any questions? Mr. Gibson.
I was just going to move for the adoption of the resolution on page 15.
Second.
Ms. Steele, will you poll the board?
Dr. Orth?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Hutson?
Yes.
Mr. Chriscoe?
Yes.
Mr. Hedrick?
Yes.
Mr. Bazzani?
Yes.
Mr. Gibson?
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you.
All right. Next item on the agenda is a request to carry over fiscal year 2023 unspent appropriations to fiscal year 2024. Ms. Callaway.
Good evening. So beginning on page 42 of your packet, you have a list of requested appropriations. These are all projects that were appropriated in fiscal year 23. They were still in progress at the end of the fiscal year, and we are requesting to have them carried over and appropriated in 2024. I'm happy to answer any questions, or there is a resolution on page 43 of your board packet.
Motion to approve, Mr. Chair.
Second, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Steele, will you poll the board?
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Hutson?
Yes.
Mr. Chriscoe?
Yes.
Mr. Hedrick?
Yes.
Mr. Bazzani?
Yes.
Mr. Gibson?
Yes.
Dr. Orth? Motion carries.
Next item on the agenda is update on the utilities AMI project. Ms. Steele and Mr. Baines and Mr. Dawson. Who wants to start? Ms. Steele.
If George, if you don't mind coming up, just so I don't mess up the company name. So they've changed names a couple of times, but as the board is aware, you all adopted in the budget to go with the AMI conversion for the water. Oh, okay, so we're advertising the new hats that are available in the visitor center. The staff has gone through with purchasing the review of 3 different applications and selected a vendor. And we've been working with Davenport to prepare to bring to you next month a couple of different borrowing options. And that will be looking at VRA as well as bank loans to which way that you want to go. So I want to make sure I say the right name, and this will be going forward to, there's no contract or anything yet. We have the offer, and it's got to go through Mr. Wilmot to make sure that it all gets approved.
Yeah. The company name is now USG. We actually have a contract with them right now to maintain our 3 water towers that we have. We got 3 different proposals in. 2 of them we're able to do without going out for any type of RFP because they have contracts with other local governments. So we were able to look at these and analyze all 3. Out of the 3, the company USG had the one that we felt met our needs the best and was the most cost effective. So in doing it, they're looking at putting in a system that they have to put up wireless network. Then they have to put in, so they put up 5 antennas around the county. Then as they replace our meters, those meters will talk to those antennas so that they can receive the data constantly back at the utilities office. So in doing that, we'll be able to manage leaks, a citizen portal, so that we can have them check, so if they want to have emails on certain times and things. We hope with this, our meters being old as they are, we have an efficiency of about 27% loss right now. So we are hoping to get down around the 10% loss, so if you can build that extra 15%, that'll bring more revenue in so we can start to do more projects with it. This company's done this in many other places, and they're across the nation, right? Yeah.
And if I can, Mr. Chair, just to add in case there's any confusion with the public, because this is a utilities project, and as stated earlier, you have a proposal that you're looking at. If that proposal, if the board decides to move forward, that's going to take a pretty good amount of time. And so we have talked before about going ahead and proceeding with this, and because this is what all the companies use now, so the companies that do the proposal would be doing the same thing, and we would include those assets in the purchase.
Mr. Wilmot.
We didn't bid it out because it's another contract?
Yes, sir.
Cooperative procurement?
Yes.
I haven't looked at that yet.
No, you didn't.
So it's premature,
It's
Well,
pending the
Christine's
contracts
supposed to be
being
sending it to
approved
you.
by the county
Nice for
attorney.
me to see it before it goes to the board. Thanks.
I was going to say Christine was the one who, but I thought she had sent this stuff to you.
I don't know.
Okay, so where are we? You're just telling us that we're looking at it, y'all are gonna vet the contract, and then you're
Yes.
gonna report back to us?
Right.
Yes, sir.
So next month, it is to report back to you, another update. This was just an update tonight on where we are. We had been instructed, get this moving quickly, so that's what we're trying to do. And so Davenport will be here next month again to offer a couple of different options for you to consider.
On the financing side.
Okay. Mr. Baines,
Yes, sir.
based on the hat, and
Yes,
I
sir.
can say this, I think Mr. Dawson should have been the one wearing it with the glare.
Yeah, well, just wanted
I
to show it
can
off.
say it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks. Next item is board appointments. We have one. Oh, that would be important. Well, let's go back to long-range planning. Well, while we're here, let's do, long-range planning, Ms. Steele.
So in the board packet, there's a couple of additional charts for the board to view, review, as well as a repeat of the Davenport information that was provided at the last meeting. And as indicated on the agenda item, the difference in the figures that are shown here in the breakout of potential spending that relate to the options A, B, and C that Davenport had, and we added in a D, the difference from last time to this time is we have incorporated in the anticipated revenue from the county garage sale, which provides upfront money, making it the revenue situation better. And then we also, in knowing that the fire department, the sports complex, and the body top project would take over more than one fiscal year. Similar to what we've done at the high school, we've proposed dividing the borrowing up so that we're not borrowing too soon. And by delaying the borrowing and breaking those percentages, it also provided a better financial situation. For example, in option A, it had been for Davenport that you would be looking at the fall, and I cannot remember if they ended up, I think that was still the fall, but Maria can correct me if I'm wrong, and this would allow that to go forward. So everything could start next spring. Not everything, each of these different ones would be eligible to start it. There's no delay based on the revenue projected. So I don't feel the need to, I'm here to answer any questions, but I think this is really pushed kind of, we've given a lot of information, Davenport's given a lot of information, so I think it's really for the board to discuss what you'd like to do vision-wise, and staff will be glad to answer any questions you have.
Questions for Ms. Steele? Comments?
Just one comment, sir. I sent an email to everybody, my thoughts on that. I misinterpreted one aspect of it, but I'm concerned about the sports complex. It is a facility that's being used by our students. We should not let it deteriorate. Mr. Records gave us a nice tour of the place, and I got to see firsthand the condition of the facility. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Dr. Orth?
I also went and had a good meeting with Mr. Records today in the sports complex, knowing where it was prior to 1996 and where we are today. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that has to go on to make it, really better usable. So yeah, it was very, very informative.
So how do we want to proceed?
Closed session.
Well, with closed session, we're not going to discuss the long-range funding. What we're going to discuss are the other options. So when we come back out of closed session, we can come back to this. But we can't discuss any of this in closed session.
Yes, sir.
Okay. That's why I was going to board appointments and wasn't thinking. But let's go to board appointments then. We've got somebody for Clean and Green.
I suggest or recommend Ms. Belcher.
Second.
And what else do we have? What?
Mr. Chair, we still need a volunteer for the Historical Committee, a representative from Petsworth. Put out many messages and requests, but I can't seem to find a volunteer, but I will keep working.
Mr. Orth? Okay. So we've got a motion and a second for Ms. Belcher for Clean Green Advisory Committee. Ms., all in favor? Aye. All right.
Mr. Wilmot, I sent about a month ago related to Low Ground Road and this one piece of property that's got giraffes and antelopes and things growing around it with tires and old cars. Did you get that with pictures and everything? I sent pictures to have this person clean his yard up. It's an eyesore on the corner of Low Ground and is it Broadmarsh, where Miss Belcher lives.
If I did, I responded.
You did?
And handled. If I did, I responded and handled.
Well, she called me and said that nothing's happened.
And the address, sir?
I'll get that for you. I don't have it in front of me right away.
Well, I can assure you that
I
as
know
soon
you
as
would
I
have acted
receive
on it.
correspondence from you or any other person in the county, I act immediately.
I know you do. Just
So,
checking.
If you'll get me the address, I'll get right on it.
Sure thing.
Thank you, sir.
I'll do that tonight.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Mr. Wilmot, would you read us into closed meeting?
Mr. Chair, would you like me to just, although action is deferred on these items until after closed session, would you like me to introduce the items because they're on the agenda? I know the action is after closed meeting, but the public is here and the public might be interested in hearing an intro to it. And then after closed meeting, you could take action on it, but you could ignore me and just say no.
Go for it. It's in the.
Thank you, sir. The materials associated with this matter commence on page 67 on your agenda packet, I believe. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Good. This is a decision on potential disposition of real property, the water and sewer system, to be considered after closed meeting. The county received an unsolicited proposal under the Public-Private Education Facilities and Infrastructure Act and Gloucester County Board of Supervisors Policy Section 250. And what that enables is outside entities, third parties, to present a proposal basically for a joint venture or a joint funding proposition, in this case a purchase. So the county received an unsolicited proposal for the purchase and operation of the county's water and sewer system, received by what's the name of it? Aqua Virginia Inc. So Aqua Virginia Inc. Submitted this unsolicited proposal. Under your policy, which is Board of Supervisors Policy 250, you are to receive that policy, and the county administrator is vested with the authority to form a working group to kind of massage and take an initial look at that proposal. And Ms. Steele has done that, and I was a participant in that initial working group. The initial working group has given you a report, but it's not an in-depth cost-benefit analysis, which it's not really intended to be. It's just an initial overview of the proposal. So at that point, it's incumbent upon the county administrator to report the initial proposal to the Board of Supervisors, whether to accept that proposal, not to convey the water and sewer system, but for further analysis. So tonight, in your closed meeting, you'll be discussing whether to proceed to the next step, which is a more in-depth analysis of this proposal, whether it's something the county wants to pursue. If the county, after coming out of a closed meeting, wants to pursue that, then you go on to the next step. It doesn't mean you're going to sell the water and sewer system. What it means is you're going to consider it more carefully, more in depth, to see whether this proposal might be something you want to pursue. And if you decide at that point you want to pursue it, then you might go out to bid and decide, well, let's see what kind of bids we get for the water and sewer system, what kind of proposals we get. If after the closed meeting you decide, no, we're not interested, then you just reject the proposal by Aqua Virginia Inc. In your packet, you have two resolutions. One is sending it on to the next stage, meaning we're going to consider it some more. We're going to consider it in depth. The other proposal, the other resolution is we're going to reject it and it's done. So that's it.
You want to talk about the other one?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
What page is that?
164.
All right, on page 164 of your agenda packet, you have a discussion decision on potential referendum for long-term financing to be considered after the closed meeting. The board has discussed a potential referendum to authorize.
We want the other closed session topic, not the
Potential.
decision piece.
Which page?
It's not in there. It's the potential disposition of an interest in real property.
Well, I said you had two options.
We have two closed sessions.
It's item A under 15.
15B, 15A.
I don't think I need to talk to that one.
I know.
All right, what I will,
That's okay.
the county owns the old page site, and the county's deciding what to do with it.
Okay,
And
now,
so tonight, we're going to talk about whether we should pursue a particular offer.
okay, now, do you want to read us in closed session?
Nothing would give me greater pleasure. Whereas the Gloucester County Board of Supervisors desires to discuss particular subjects in closed meeting during the course of its meeting on August 1, 2023, and whereas the nature of the subjects is discussion or consideration of the disposition of an interest in publicly held real property known as the Old Page Middle School property. The discussion of same in a closed meeting is expressly permitted by Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711A3, and discussion or consideration of the disposition of interest in publicly held real property, the water and sewer system. The discussion of same in closed meeting is expressly permitted by Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711A3. Now therefore be it resolved that the Gloucester County Board of Supervisors does hereby convene in closed meeting for the purposes herein expressed pursuant to the legal authority herein recite.
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Steele, will you poll the board?
Mr. Hutson?
Yes.
Mr. Chriscoe?
Yes.
Mr. Hedrick?
Yes.
Mr. Bazzani?
Yes.
Mr. Gibson?
Yes.
Dr. Orth?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Yes, sir. Whereas the Gloucester County Board of Supervisors has completed its discussion in closed meeting and now desires to continue its open meeting, and whereas only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting were heard, discussed, or considered during the closed meeting, and the only subjects heard, discussed, or considered in said closed meeting were the matters identified in the resolution by which it was convened. Now therefore be it resolved, the Gloucester County Board of Supervisors does hereby reconvene an open meeting at its meeting of August 1, 2023, and certifies the matters set forth in Virginia Code Section 2.2-3712D.
Mr. Chriscoe?
Yes.
Mr. Hedrick?
Yes.
Mr. Bazzani?
Yes.
Mr. Gibson?
Yes.
Dr. Orth? Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Hutson?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Decision on potential referendum for long-term financing to be considered. Mr. Wilmot.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Steele and I guess will be presenting this, or perhaps just me. This is a discussion and/or decision on potential referendum for long-term financing to be considered after the closed meeting. You've had the closed meeting, but not on that subject, but on tangentially related subjects. The board has been discussing the potential for long-term financing for capital needs. After the closed meeting, the board will consider the possibility of requesting a referendum on the question of contracting debt for the capital needs. You have in your packet, commencing on page 164, two possible resolutions. Each resolution contains a possible question for a referendum. The board is not obligated to pass either one. You would pass one of the two versions, or perhaps another version, if you were intended upon calling for a referendum. Referenda are allowable under Virginia law to decide whether to get a sense of the locality, whether to authorize a long-term borrowing, and that's what you would be doing. And that would be for capital needs. And you have certain capital needs which you've identified previously that are contained in each of these versions of the resolution. And those capital needs involve needs of the volunteer fire and rescue departments, construction, improvement, and/or renovation of public school buildings and facilities, and parks and recreation. So each of the two versions of the resolution would ask the circuit court to approve a referendum, which would ostensibly occur at the next general election, which is November Mr. Chriscoe? 7th, because I know he knows that. So November the 7th. The deadline for getting a circuit court ordering the referendum is August 17th or 18th. So I know it's the 18th, but to me it's the 17th, because I never wait till the last day, because you might have a snow day in August, you don't know. Or a hurricane, or a hurricane. So it's the 17th. So if you are intended upon calling for a referendum, which is required to issue general obligation capital bonds, and you have to get a majority of the electorate to approve that in November, the deadline for getting a circuit court order is, I know it's the 18th, August the 17th. So I need enough time to present it to Judge Shaw because he is, believe it or not at my beck and call. So this is your opportunity to, if you want to pursue this, to pass one of the resolutions or a version thereof. The difference between the two resolutions is the first resolution does not contain an estimated tax increase, which would be which would accompany that kind of borrowing. The second resolution does. There are blanks. There are blanks, importantly, for the amount of the bonds, aggregate cost of the capital projects in both resolutions. And there's a blank for in the second version for the estimated tax increase associated with the bonds. Both T.W. Bruno and I recommend against putting in the estimated amount of tax increase associated with the bonds. I understand transparency. I understand telling the electorate what's involved. We both do. We're 100% in favor of that. But it's incumbent upon the county to come up with the educational materials associated with a referendum, and that information would be included in those educational materials, so that the citizens would know that. They would know, and they would be told how much projected tax increase would be associated with this level of borrowing. And I've been told it was somewhere between a penny and 2 pennies on the per $100 of assessed value. So we put that in there. Each version of the resolution is legal. You can do either one, but you've heard from both the real lawyer and me that we recommend against putting that in there. So you have several options tonight. You could do nothing, and that means basically you're not going to call for a referendum. And that means you can't take advantage this year of that kind of borrowing unless you do the referendum at some other date. It doesn't have to be held on the general election date. You could do a special election. But typically we don't do that because that involves more costs to the county. And it also doesn't have the turnout that you would want, I think, in a referendum. You want more people rather than fewer people to come out and give their opinion. So you could do nothing. Or you could choose one of the two versions or some other version.
If I can, Mr. Chair, there's one other thing, the schools resolution that's required by code.
So that's why we're not voting on this tonight.
Well, then, thank you for that.
We're not voting on this tonight.
We cannot vote on this because in order for you to pass this resolution requesting a referendum, the schools, because a portion of it has to do with the schools, they have to have passed a resolution requesting that you do so. And Ms. Steele just told me,
No, they're doing that at their,
It'll be at their regular meeting on Tuesday night. It's on their agenda.
So if you're intended upon doing this, if and when the schools pass that resolution, you'd have to call a special meeting
or continue this meeting.
or continue this meeting.
See, I got you tonight.
You did.
Between the 5th and the 12th, I won't be here.
It's the 15th.
I'll be.
The 15th is doable for me as any date you pick, because Michael Bublé's not in concert that night.
15th.
But,
Can I charge a cost of a plane to come back?
but, remember, the deadline is the 17th, and so if you wait till the 15th, then I have to get Judge Shaw to sign it the 16th or the 17th, which may not happen. I'll try.
And I want to make one point. Because Mr. Wilmot was nice enough to mention it, that you want to hold this on a general election. And we've had multiple conversations, and we've talked about this for several months. With everything that we have moving forward, I don't see the issue with doing something along these lines. But in 2024, there's a presidential election and federal elections, and we always have a higher voter turnout on those years. So while we're contemplating this, I just want everybody to think about that as well, to push this off while we're juggling every other conceivable monetary issue in the county. One more year to handle this. I know things will cost a little bit more, but hopefully we'll have a better understanding of what's going on and everything else. That's the only thing I'm going to say.
No, you had your finger faster.
Quick draw.
Like Jeopardy. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a question for Mr. Wilmot. On the list of projects that would be funded, you have general topics in 1, 2, and 3. We have talked about 12 different projects under those general topics. What is the thinking behind having 3 main topics versus listing specific projects? Is this to provide flexibility? I'm just concerned that I want to ensure that the public knows what they are voting for.
I think the thought was flexibility. I took basically most of the wording from county administration. And I'm not throwing Carol under the bus, I'm not. And I don't necessarily disagree.
I took it from another referendum, so I took it from another community.
I personally would prefer specifics, like specific projects, and you list them, and if they're not among the specifics, then they're not included. But I also understand the desire for flexibility. For example, the volunteer fire and rescue departments. I had initially put buildings, but I understood they might want hook and ladders or fire trucks or other capital needs that they might want to utilize the funding for. So the generalization is to accommodate flexibility.
Just follow up on that one. I would tend to agree with Mr. Wilmot, that part of this building consensus, if we put this before the public, is the issue of trust. And if we are asking the voters to incur this debt, I think that if we list them specifically, there's trust that we as a board will fulfill that vote in the future. And there's a level of accountability having specifics as opposed to general. So that would be my position on it. I think it would also be easier to educate the public if you have each of these projects listed in the referendum.
Mr. Chair?
Hold on.
May I just?
Yes.
Okay.
One thing the county must do is accompany its referendum question with the educational materials, which will spell out in detail the specifics. And the other thing the county must do is the question presented on the referendum has to be simple. And so although I do advocate being specific with reference to the projects to be funded with the bond funds, we have to somehow put that in a simple question. So we could put general categories and yet be married to the specific projects by virtue of the educational materials we disseminate accompanying the question. So if you can come up with a simple question with 12 disciples in it, well, 11, because one's gone, 11, then maybe there's room. But it's hard.
One quick question. Are you saying that if we approve the fire department's building, they can take some of that money and buy ladder trucks with that?
No.
Well, it would depend on the educational materials and the actual bond documents.
Because then we're going to end up with the same situation we had with the 5 cent, the 1 penny sales tax, using it for debt.
Well, my initial version of this had put buildings, but that was nixed.
But Mr. Wilmot, was it not nixed because it was for capital? And if we came back later and we had money left over, they might want to buy a vehicle that was still capital because it's over the $50,000.
Well, yes.
But the main thing here is for the building and for the bunkhouse.
And they can't divert any of that money away.
I would have limited to buildings.
Really important point, depending upon the supposed tax rate or the capacity that you would want to go to. If you look at the charts on page 47 through 49, and you look at the bottom line where it says 2033 remaining borrowing capacity. So you have as much as 20 million dollars that could still be spent beyond those 12 projects. So categorically, we're talking a 10-year period where things are going to show up. Other problems, other, capital needs are going to be there. What you have listed in here is 5 years worth of capital in a 10-year period. And coming up later on this year, you're going to have the next 5 years, and then the next 5 years, each annual time, and some of those are going to be pay-go, and some of those are going to be financed. If you go with the zero tax increase, there's no additional funds, and you don't even fund all the projects. So it depends upon how much the board wants to borrow as to listing beyond those 12 projects. And the flexibility, exactly what, Mr. Wilmot said, as far, we don't know what's going to happen, rates could change, and the equipment part, the board would be approving this. So every time just like when the high school needs to get additional money, they come to you and there's an appropriation. So every single time we would be borrowing, it would be coming to the board and asking, okay, this is what the price came in at, we need to do this, and, so the board would have say-so annually, if not even more, depending upon when the borrowing times would be.
So, I have a question.
Go, Mr. Chriscoe.
Let me get back to the right sheet here because, and it's my understanding, and I may be wrong, if we were to wait, could we still not, without any referendum, borrow next fall to start the firehouse projects without a referendum?
That's correct. Davenport said there's enough money to go next fall.
That's where I'm at, is we have a lot of irons in the fire. We have a lot of options on the table. We can bring this referendum back next year for the projects outside of the two firehouses. We can start those next fall and then bring this referendum back once we have other decisions that we're looking at that we discussed earlier tonight in closed session. Gives us the flexibility to then know exactly what we're going to need for the 10 other remaining projects next year at this time.
Take one bite of the apple.
That's my thoughts for what they're worth.
Mr. Chair, I would agree with Mr. Chriscoe's premise. Let's just take one bite of the apple this year, and then next year we see what we have with the other projects. To take 10 bites of the apple and leave with a core that leaves you with nothing is not a smart idea.
So we have to wait. Okay, so we wait next week for the schools, and then on the 15th, we make that final decision.
We can decide, right?
What's that?
No, so the timeline is, we don't do anything tonight, correct?
Correct.
The school meets next Tuesday.
Correct.
And if they approve that, then on the 15th, we have a special meeting, which, no, you said we're going to continue this meeting?
We're going to continue this meeting.
For the 15th to decide on the referendum and its timeline, correct? Okay.
But go ahead.
Shouldn't we move that date up a little bit from the 15th?
We could move it to the 14th.
I thought we were talking about the 9th or something like that.
I won't be here.
Oh,
And I was trying to get everybody here.
okay.
Right, I respect that, Mr. Chairman.
With a decision of this magnitude, I wanted everybody here, and I know you said you could make it to it.
Yeah, I'm going to make it. We tried. But I will do it. This is important.
That's why I just recommended what I did, was because we have a lot of things going on. And Mr. Wilmot made the mention of you want as many voters to vote on this as you can. Next year is a presidential election. We generally have the highest turnout for that election. And that's why, with Davenport telling us we can get the first two projects done, I don't see a huge increase of any option other than the 2 cent that fast forwards much if we wait a calendar year. If we do it that way, we don't have to come back on the 15th. The schools can still ask us, we'll just tell them to ask us again next year, and we can have this done by August the 15th of next year, and have all of this information, plus some other information that we don't have all of it yet, and do the referendum portion of this next year, while also starting with the two fire department issues that everyone has agreed is probably the most pressing and would get done first.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Gibson.
I appreciate that option. My concern with that option is that if you look at page 47 at the top, under your timeline that you're proposing, yes, we can start on the fire department, and we all agree that's the top priority. My concern is that under that proposal, the next project that we could even consider, it could be the beach or it could be the sports complex, one or the other, but the next project would be 3 years from now. The next project would be 6 years from now. And what's happening during that time frame is inflationary construction costs. And so by delaying those projects 3, 6, 10 years, some of these other projects wouldn't even be started until 2033, those projects, those cost estimates are at the window, and we're going to be spending millions and millions and millions of dollars more by delaying. So that's my response on that issue. I think it comes down to we should let the people decide, and they can decide in 2023 or they can decide in 2024, but at least we've got their input, because we as a board could just unilaterally say, we want to do these projects and we're going to address taxes as we see fit. But I think we shouldn't be afraid to hear from the public, see what they want to do, because we have all these capital needs that we've heard the citizens say we need. And the public needs to make a choice. Do they want to make that decision to move forward with these projects? So that's my position on it. And last thing, I'm going to wrap it up, is I do feel that as a matter of trust and accountability and informing the public, that we shouldn't rely on just the educational materials, and we should make the most concise question possible, but identify the major projects that would be included in this referendum.
Mr. Chriscoe.
Yes, and the main reason is we did not take action on an item tonight on our agenda. We're delaying that till September. An item that could really truly affect the amount of total borrowing we would have to do. So that's why I figured that by the time we have that decision made, then that will change how much money potentially we have to borrow at referendum, which we would have prior to next August. We would know an amount such if an amount became available to us that could change the whole structure of what we're doing here. That's the reason for my recommendation, because everything's going to cost more unless the economy really goes bust, which no one seems to think that's going to happen now from what I'm reading, but it gives us the flexibility and the time to get all of the information, see what we're going to be coming to and face. That's why I was saying let's get started on the first two, and then we'll have more clarity into what's going to happen with the item F that we took no action on tonight.
First two, Mr. Chriscoe, fire rescue. And what's the other one?
No, just
Fire and Rescue.
Just fire rescue.
The two fire department projects.
The two of them.
Ms. Steele.
I totally agree with what Mr. Chriscoe said as being completely factual. I would add in an additional comment. I got it on twice. It came up, sorry. That if additional revenue comes in from any source, anything at all, we don't have to necessarily borrow. If a bond referendum is passed, it says you have the authority to borrow the maximum of this amount. So anything that would be positive, for example, in these proposals, we purposefully took out the sale of Fire and Rescue's property, but yet most likely that's going to impact these plans. So if something positive happened, it would be good news and say, hey, and letting the public know that. If the board wants to go the other direction.
So what you're saying, excuse me.
Go ahead, hit your mic.
So what you're saying, Ms. Steele, is it says you have the capacity to borrow up to this amount, but you don't have to spend that amount.
Right, there's, and I think from what I heard from Mr. Gibson, if we listed, somehow try to, again, minimize as much, but to say including, like, say, improvements at Woodville Park maybe, or something, I don't know, instead of listing every single one, include Gloucester Point Beach Park, but obviously the fire and rescue, so we try to list those things, and it would say such as, or including, any of the other items, anything else that happens that affects the revenue, it would be up to the board again to, if you're adding something to it, as long as you did the minimum, and what you did on that minimum, you could either do from the bonds that you'd be borrowing or revenues that came in from other sources.
And I totally agree with that, what Mr. Gibson said. I believe in being transparent. And also, since I have the mic, Mr. Wilmot was saying that him and Mr. Bruno, that we didn't have to put an amount in the referendum, tax increase. But to me, that would also is not, it wouldn't seem transparent to me, because you don't want citizens to think that, this could be 10 cents, 25 cents. If we let them know it's 2 cents and let them know up front now, let them know. We're being transparent, so I think you definitely need to add the amount in there.
Dr. Orth.
With some of the projects that we proposed, if we moved forward with a referendum this fall, are there economies of scale on some of these projects that could be bundled, that we could get things done together to eliminate the cost? So, for example, when I was talking with Mr. Records today, he was discussing the possibility that there could be some savings if we move forward faster rather than wait till 2029. That's what I'm thinking, is that, that's something that, we hadn't considered, but, there's the possibility that we could be saving money with some of these projects.
So I know that Mr. Gibson brought up in the very beginning about the potential of the sports complex being done in conjunction with the high school to try and save funds. And depending upon which plan the board would go with, it's possible to begin that project soon enough within the end. One of the challenges is going to be that the board had authorized for looking at the parking layout changes, and obviously when you have construction you have staging areas and things like that. So Mr. Records is going to provide a schematic, which would also be in the educational materials, that would say, here's how, because we know the tennis courts may be moved, where are they going to be moved to, and it may be a proposed schematic, but I think the answer is yes. It's not a slam dunk. It's a good sports thing that for the pun, but it's not a slam dunk because of if the area is already going to be taken up or under construction. But there's a good possibility that if the sports complex was timed earlier in the borrowing, that it could go along with the high school project.
Mr. Hedrick.
Yeah, I was getting back to the possible need to advertise the 2-cent real estate tax increase. I think that's going to be in the informational kit that's going to be put out in the public. Yes. And I suppose depending on how that goes, that should alleviate some of Mr. Smith's concern.
I think Mr. Smith actually wants it in the question, and you can have it in the question, but you are bound by your educational materials. So, but I've heard both.
So, Mr. Chair, if I could.
Mr. Bazzani.
So in option A, I noticed, in 2026, the beach is number 3 on 2026. But if you add 1 cent, now the beach becomes something later, and then the sports complex moves up. I don't understand the logic behind that.
The logic behind that is the amount of money that we have funding.
Affordability.
It's better to put your higher, more expensive projects earlier on if you have the money there, because when you take that inflation rate, it adds up a lot. So if we held off, say, example, the sports complex, and you look at that chart that we provided, the inflation really adds up, where a project like the beach, the reason we were trying to slide it in was, first of all, it was a smaller amount of money that would fit, but we're also looking at the 2026 250th celebration, so we were trying to clean the beach up a little bit as fast as we can. But in every one of these, we were trying to move the fire and rescue was there as the priority, and then going for the sports complex second, because that had been listed by the board and, talked about, and the idea of moving the more expensive projects up to save on inflation.
So it goes back to what Mr. Chriscoe said. Let's just do the referendum for the firehouse, and then next year we have the other items coming in.
I don't even need a referendum.
You won't even need a referendum. Just do the firehouse today. No referendum this year. Wait till next year for the other items. To see what the public wants to spend their money on.
See what comes from item F.
Right. Why do we need a referendum now if we're just going to decide to do the fire and rescue today? And then next year, we got a presidential election where over 70% of the county will be voting on something. We can get a better feel for what the county feels they want, as opposed to only 10% of our county will be voting this November in an election. So it's better just to have a bigger sample size than a small sample size.
Mr. Hedrick.
I don't know what percentage of voters will vote November 7th, but I do know that when you have a referendum on the ballot, that brings out people. It has a lot to do with how this will be advertised. I would expect that you'll have similar numbers in 2023 as you do in 2024. Not quite as much, but it'll be significant.
Me too.
And one more point. I'm with Mr. Smith. You gotta tell the taxpayer what's going to cost them. You just can't leave it blank and then hope for the best. The first questions I'm going to get is, well, how much is this going to cost me? What's it going to on my tax rate? So full disclosure, it has to be in the referendum if you're going to do a referendum. But I'm really opposed to a referendum this year. If we're going to do the fire and rescue, let's do the fire and rescue. That's very important. The public hired the 7 of us to make that kind of a decision. On the other ones, we can wait till next year.
We can't vote tonight either way.
Vote tonight, but it sounds like 7-0 for next year. So you could do a resolution next time for next year.
No, sir, where'd you get that from? Where'd you get that from?
Because all 7 of you want one, just not this year.
We want, no. I didn't say that.
So, but what? Well, let me ask you a question. With reference to the 2 resolutions, one on page 165 and one on 167, what did the real attorney suggest?
I drafted these and I passed them by him. He had some constructive suggestions, some of which I incorporated, the others were not correct, so I didn't.
Hold on. With that being said, for preparation for for the continuation of this meeting, we're inclined, or the majority is inclined, for the resolution that starts on page 167.
Yes, sir. Could you tentatively fill in the blanks?
Well, that's what I'm trying to get at.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, ma'am.
Just to, the research that we did, and I think that goes along with why both attorneys were saying to do the maximum amount, is because a point that was raised several times, that the penny rate changes. So if you have people, if you say a penny and it ends up maybe that they have a 3-cent tax increase because of changes, or they may have a half a penny tax increase because of these things, that's one. And then you have other revenue sources. And so I'm fine with whichever way. I'm just telling you, this is what the research I did said, don't put the amount in, but put the total amount, because it gives you the flexibility to, if you decide to not raise real estate tax, but to look at using personal property, half a penny there or whatever. It just allows you to do those things differently. Now, if the board was inclined to go that way from an educational materials, we would definitely do the thing of showing the average house and what we think it's going to be, whatever the tax rate y'all would do, and show that kind of information. I'm fine with the other, but I just wanted to be, just explain that that's what was recommended.
Thank you for that, Ms. Steele, but I can't go along with that.
But again, it's up, these are board decisions that would be in front of us.
So, in the event that a resolution is passed to have a referendum, what's the consensus on 165 versus 167? 165 has the total amount, 167 has the total amount and an estimated real estate increase.
Full disclosure to the citizens.
So 167.
You got to disclose it.
Yeah, I had not thought about the point that Carol made about the fluctuating value of a penny. And so I'd like to give this more thought before I commit to the language on this.
Well, I said a month ago.
Okay.
I mean, this.
But I am supportive of the option C with that amount, which is, I believe, about 39 million.
No, that is not correct, because what Davenport has presented us, you have to add the $20 million remaining in borrowing capacity. There's a difference, because what Davenport has put us and what this gray sheet shows us on 48 is two different items. 39 million, we get 37 million with no change. And then if you go to 2 cent, you're going to be able to borrow 59 million. So this gray sheet in here tonight is different than what Davenport has given us. So there's another issue that I have. The thing is, we can do the firehouses without doing a referendum. It buys us time to figure out what goes on with F, so that we can then determine how much more capacity we need. That's the whole thing here.
But we've been buying time for a decade, and it's always next year, and it always costs more. And that's the problem, is we're going to end up paying double or triple 5, 10 years from now for these projects. We all agree that the sports complex is needed, these other upgrades are needed, but the inflation is going to drive these costs up very high. And so the next year approach ends up losing us money as a county, and that's my concern.
The athletic complex was not even contemplated in this year's CIP. It wasn't even scored. I mean, we are, but we have different numbers that we've been presented for months, and now tonight, I noticed just the other day that the difference is huge, because a 2 cent increase does not mean we can only borrow $39 million, because right here, with a no increase is $37 million.
No, can I finish?
Yeah, no.
That is the total amount that we would borrow, not the total amount we can borrow. And the reason why that the difference is between the 41, the 37, the 41 is because we would be borrowing at different times and we would be borrowing it cheaper. Ms. Steele.
I'm sorry that I did not put when I have just say, for example, option C, where it says 39 million, I thought it was implied that you would look at the line beneath it and know you have $20 million more capacity, so it's actually 59. The reason that it's different than what Davenport said is because, as it stated, there are two different changes. One is this includes the sale from the garage, and it also divides up the years in the borrowing, so we're only doing 75% of the borrowing in year one for fire and rescue, and then we would borrow the next spring to finish off paying that off. So those are why there's a little bit of difference here and there. And we also, this is something Maria and I worked on quite a bit, and you know, whatever the final goes through, we'll make sure that Davenport puts their blessing on it. But I apologize that I didn't put that amount in there so you would see. That's because it's very important that you have more capacity, and they never looked at what the projects. They just looked at the capacity. I was trying to show you how that capacity per each year under the different scenarios could be spent, and then what you'd have left over.
Dr. Orth.
I just want to say I appreciate, Ms. Steele, you and your staff, everything you've done to give us the most accurate information to keep the borrowing as low as possible and for the longer period of time. You know, I know you've worked numbers over and over. We've had these same spreadsheets that have been modified over time. I know you've done due diligence to figure out and offer the board the best possible solution if we want to move forward with a referendum. And again, you know, if the referendum does go in November and it's approved, you know, we have lots of options in terms of what gets done based on the economy. We could just hold off on everything, but on the other hand, the economy might improve. We don't know. No one knows what's going to happen with the economy, you know, in the next year. So I just think that's just my thought.
So, Mr. Wilmot, if we, thank you, Mr. Chair. If we go through with the referendum, and let's say, you know, we're going to do projects 1, 2, and 3 for the referendum, and let's say we change our mind next year, are they going to say, wait a minute, we voted for this, you got to spend the money on this? What if we change our mind and say, well, right now the economy's bad, we can't do this right now? Are our hands tied because of the referendum? Because that's why I'm opposed to a referendum this year. Are our hands tied on spending this money?
I don't want to speak out of school, but I think the answer to your question is no. This authorizes that you borrow the money, but it does not mandate or dictate that you borrow the money. So I've run off all the statutes, so while I'm cogitating, I'll make sure my answer is correct. But all the referendum does is get a sense of the community to whether you're allowed to borrow the money. It does not mandate that you do, and I can't imagine that the voters are.
But if you're tying borrowing the money to a specific project, and that project does not.
Well, it would limit you.
Yeah,
If
so
you were to
you're
borrow
tied.
to the projects listed in the referendum.
Right, so you can't deviate from the projects you want to borrow money for.
No.
If the referendum says, we want this.
Yes, but my understanding from day one.
I think your
that,
hands are tied.
You know, the referendum passes and we can decide to hold off based on the economy. We don't have to move forward with a lot of this if we know that things are not looking good. I mean, that's been, to me, the item of discussion that stood out.
Well, yes, sir, but the school board's going to be making a decision on these things, and I can potentially see next year, well, you guys, we had a referendum, and you guys said you were going to do the sports complex, and now you decided you don't want to do it. You're obligated to do it, and we're going to sue you for that.
No, I don't think
that's the risk. That's the risk.
I think that there's definitely some risk with all of us. The other risk is that if the economy is as it is now or better, every year that you're holding off is not just an inflationary expense, but these are needs that have been listed for years. The sports complex has only been on the CIP for 2 years, and it wasn't rated because they had pushed it onto the thing about being a finance project. But my concern kind of goes back to when people initially look at this list and they expect everything to be done right away. And I think it would be very important in the educational materials, because by borrowing this money, it does come in certain times. And there are people going to be like, well, I thought you were going to do this or that, whether the economy is good or not. So I think that the board would want to be very transparent in saying, this is what we're trying to do on these particular years, because people would like to see these facilities, and, you know, and they're going to mean a lot to the county.
But the risk we run is we're going to have a school board member, as they did last time, go to the Attorney General and say, hey, they promised us they would improve the ball fields, and now they're not going to do it. We had a referendum that said we would do it, and now the Board of Supervisors says they're not going to do it. For whatever reason, the economy, the cost of the project, whatever. You run that risk.
To answer Mr. Bazzani's question, Mr. Chair, if I may, no, if the majority of the voters vote to approve the referendum, that does not obligate you to borrow the money, A. B, as worded, the projects are in such general terms as to not dictate a specific project. It just authorizes volunteer fire and rescue, it authorizes building facilities for the schools, and it authorizes spending for parks and recreation. That's what it does. Now, you will be married to the educational materials which you disseminate accompanying the bond. You'll be bound by those. So if you list specific projects in those educational materials, then you'll be limited to those. But you can carefully fashion those to make one or more of the following. So no, A, you're not obligated if the referendum passes to borrow the funds. And B, if you decide to issue bonds, you're only obligated to utilize them for the purposes for which the question and the educational materials were pointing.
Mr. Chriscoe.
Will we have that informational material prior to our vote on the 15th?
Probably not, because it's, and I understand your desire for that, but that's really your bailiwick, along with administration, to come up with what you would feel comfortable with and what you want to be in the educational materials.
My intent was to have it at the September meeting if the board voted, and that, so I've already assigned staff that deadline and everything to make. I mean, we literally had when it can come in, when it's got to be made for the board packet, so it would be the September board meeting, so that if you all approved it or tweaked it and we approved it, we would go public on our websites and things the very next day. I mean, if you were deciding tonight and if there was some consensus, we could start working immediately, but right now I don't know how much money, so trying to put together which projects would be listed, I don't know the answer to be able to put it together for our staff to do that.
How long would it take your staff to do it?
Well, there's a couple of different things. One, we want to have really sharp-looking schematics and things that, from a marketing / educational purpose, that explain. And so listing and a bare bones outline, no time at all. But to have a piece that really looks good, I mean, if we could have a draft for the next meeting, it would be a very rough draft, but because like I'm still waiting, we need to get the sports complex drawing. We need to put some other things together from the CIPs. We have like the body top pictures. I talked to the superintendent today about, looking through and seeing which pictures they'd want to put in and how to express that. But we can definitely have a draft.
So we're going to commit without a scope of work on the sports comp? That is wrong.
We have a CIP project that describes which it talks about, the tennis courts are going to be completely redone and resurfaced, and talks about the synthetic the synthetic field that's inside the stadium. It has the bathrooms and concession stand on both sides being redone. I mean, it lists, it's been in the CIP for a couple of years, but I think people want to see, oh, you're talking about changing the layout of how the parking's going to be, and I heard Mr. Hartley mention about trying to kind of control the security and then, to better access that. So we need to have that in that material.
I got you, but without a scope of work and without schematics, how can a responsible bidder bid on all of this? We don't even know what this is going to cost.
We have an estimate they have an estimate from Mosley. They already have worked up those estimates. It's a matter of putting the schematic there.
We're putting the cart before the horse.
I mean, again, these are projects that have been turned into the CIP, all but the fire and rescue. And fire and rescue has already done a lot of their work. And I've talked with Brad Burgess from Abingdon, saying we're going to need to have information that would go in there that would describe the work that's going to be done to their facility. So we would be gathering that too.
Well, for 12 years I've been on this board, I've never heard about the sports complex. I am in favor of doing the sports complex, but I've never heard of the sports complex until...
It's been in the last 2 years,
2 years ago, but that's fine. But it was scored low. It was scored on the bottom of the barrel, not on top, but on the bottom. So...
So in the last year...
Excuse me, but I would be I'm sorry, Carol. I would be in favor of just... We don't need a referendum to do the fire and rescue. I'm still agreeing to Mr. Chriscoe's idea is that we just do the fire and rescue this year, no referendum is needed, and then next year, we're not kicking the can down the road. All we're saying in the next budget year coming up, we're going to be doing the budget here in March of next year. We will then get a clear picture of which projects we want to implement and whether or not we have the stomach to raise taxes or not to do them.
So, Mr. Chair, what's the next step?
Next step is we need to determine if we're going to come back on the 15th, 16th, 15th, have a meeting, and to help staff develop the resolutions for the referendum. We need to have the amounts, the rough percentage, a rough sense that we want to, if that's the resolution, the one on page 167 that we want to go by. We need to know the total amount borrowed, and that's going to depend upon, I guess we need to start with what level everybody's comfortable with. Then we can determine what's the level of borrowing is going to be, because we can't determine the level of borrowing until we know what the capacity is going to be.
Okay. So does that mean we meet on the 15th?
I would like right now for somebody to not make a motion, but make a suggestion on where the level needs to be. What option? What option? No, we're not making a motion because we're going to come back in 2 weeks and actually make the motion. What we're trying to do right now is help Ms. Cronin, help staff write the resolution so it'll be in the packet for us that we'll vote on it on Tuesday, in 2 weeks. Okay. Mr. Hedrick, were you going to say something?
So if I were to suggest that we advertise a rate of 2 cents or the equivalent of today's equivalent of that, would that satisfy the suggestion?
So you're looking at option C?
Yes.
Okay. What is the thought of the board? Mr. Gibson?
I support option C.
Dr. Orth?
C.
Mr. Smith?
Option C.
Good Lord. Jeez.
Option C.
Mr. Chriscoe?
Option A is the furthest I would even consider going, being that we took no action on F and there's too much information out there for me to feel comfortable.
Mr. Bazzani?
I just really am concerned about the cavalier attitude we have of just raising taxes because we want all these projects done at the same time. No, I am not. I'm for option A. Cavalier attitudes get us in trouble.
Well, I would respectfully disagree that this has been a cavalier attitude when we've been discussing this for months. And we are not making this decision. We are asking the citizens to make this decision. Is this what you want? It would be cavalier for us to say, we know what's best for you and we're going to do this no matter what you think. We're saying, would you like to do this? You've expressed these needs. This is the cost of completing these projects. So it's yes, you want to pay, I believe what Mr. Hedrick mentioned, based on his calculations for an average market price house, it's about $5.50 a month. Do you want to pay that type of cost and complete these types of projects, or do you want to vote no? And we're just putting it in the voters' hands. I think it's a measured approach. There's lots of safeguards. And so I think it's the complete opposite of being cavalier. And I know we can agree to disagree, but that's my thought on it.
I would second that. I mean, we've been talking about this for a long time, and I've gone back and forth, and it's not like I haven't thought about this for a long time, but I have. And especially after, walking around the sports complex with Mr. Records and knowing that there may be lots of economies of scale if we move forward quickly. I just think, as with Mr. Gibson, let's let the citizens tell us. We're not, we could have very easily ignore this entire conversation and move forward with it, but we want the citizens to know that we want their input. And that's the way I'm looking at it.
One more reminder, the complexion of this board may change in November. And what we decide today may not be what the
Well, we
board
don't
next
know.
time
No
decides.
one really
So it's
knows
not
what's-
fair to make this kind of a decision before November.
We're not making a decision. Only decision we're.
The citizens are making it.
We'll end up making a decision as whether or not we're going to do a referendum or not. Maybe the next board may not want the referendum.
Maybe not. We don't, no one knows
It's
what's
not fair
gonna
to do
happen.
that.
Yeah, but no one knows.
There's three
what's
of us are
happen.
going to be missing.
We can't predict anything about the future.
Two.
Mr. Hedrick.
It's interesting that we have to debate such things. When I ran for office, I made it perfectly clear I was running for one term. Nothing has changed in that 3.5 years, and it won't change in the last 6 months of my duty to the county. I have just as much right to give input today as I did the first day, and just as much right to give input on the last day in my office. I would appreciate my colleague refraining from making any kind of comments about the fact I ran for one term only.
So, Mr. Chair, it looks like the timeline is.
The timeline is, what we're gonna do is we're gonna continue this meeting, but we'll get to that when we get to that point in the agenda. Ms. Steele and staff is gonna come up and have the resolution written that mirrors the one on page 167 with the 2-cent, approximate 2-cent increase based on today's rates, based on option Cs.
And we will have
The
Davenport.
39,582, but
Yes, it's 59, but we'll have Davenport run our numbers to make sure they're correct. The other thing I wanted to make sure, Mr. Chair, when putting that, do you want us to list, including projects such as, and list the ones that are on there for the transparency, or do you want to go with the way it is? Or do you want to see them both, to see how it looks?
I'm inclined to leave it as it is, because that's what the real attorney suggested. But if we could do it, because it's gonna have to be vetted with the clerk also, so it's on the ballot, that makes sense.
And the summary, there's one summary that is basically required, and that's up to 500-word accurate summary accompanying the question. So it's a very limited, that could contain your estimated tax. We're already going to do your estimated tax, but the specific projects. You're also allowed to disseminate factual, additional information. There's no word limit to that. But there's more than 100 words on a tube of toothpaste. So it's a very, I've counted them. There's a very limited, when you say 500 words, it's like very short. So what I recommend is to make the question readable and simple, because it has to be simple. If you're going to put the tax rate in it, which is fine, it already makes it a very long Faulkner-esque question. So you might not want to add much more in the question itself to make it readable. Question shouldn't be more than 50 words.
Mr. Wilmot, Mr. Chair,
Yes.
what happens if the referendum fails?
Then you're not allowed to utilize this funding mechanism. But you can't utilize this funding mechanism if you don't go to referendum, so you really you haven't.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Steele, based on, if you look at the referendum, or the resolution on page 167, the second whereas on page 167, is that going to be 39,582 based on your numbers on page 48?
It would be the higher number.
It would be the 59.
And the 59 is the maximum. So in other words, that's if you're waiting until 2033 to actually spend any money. You would have money before in 2032, but you're not going to have, like that 20 million is if you wait, because we are retiring debt again in that 2033. So if you said, well, we don't want to skip 2 years, or we want to do something in 32, you're not going to have the full 20 million. But the
So that
maximum.
number is going to be 59.
Yes.
And the amount for bond maximum is 59 again. On
Right.
page 168. So you're repeating the number?
And you can repeat the number, but you don't have to. The number on 167, which is the total aggregate cost of the capital projects, can be more than the amount that you borrow. And actually, it might make you look better when you tell the people that we think it's going to cost 59 million for these projects, but we're only asking for permission to fund.
39,582.
Yeah, something like that. But that's up to y'all.
Because that's all that's been evaluated right now.
Yes. Yep. So if you didn't want to do anything besides those, and you could stop at that point, and over the time period, you could look at borrowing again in 33.
That's where I
based on.
that's where I disagree with your questions. I think the second whereas should be the 39,582. Whereas on page 168, the maximum amount of the 59 at 2 cents per 100.
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
Because our only capital goals, the only capital that we've approved right now that we're even looking at are the 39,582.
But the second whereas paragraph, whereas the estimated aggregate cost of the capital projects is, that's the highest number. So it could be equal to the amount you want to borrow, or it could be more than the amount you're going to borrow. But it can't be less than your amount to.
I think he's looking at it as the 39 is listed.
As the
If
capital
the total
projects.
amount of all 12 projects is only 39, so in that second whereas, if you're saying 59, you haven't listed the other items. So if you're looking specifically at what the aggregate cost of the named capital projects, it would be 39. But
Mr.
from a
Wilmot.
resolution, they're only seeing, I mean, the referendum is only looking at this question, right? They don't see this other
If you
resolution.
need 39 million, you're not going to borrow 59 million.
Mr. Wilmot, would you look at page 48, please? Option C, top one. The total amount borrowed based on the amounts that for the capital funds is 39,582,993. The 2
see the line,
cents,
yeah.
excuse me?
I was just saying the line underneath,
The
right?
2 cents, if it's continued, then in 2033, we would have an additional $20 million in borrowing capacity.
Right over here, that makes no sense.
Because of the way that we have borrowing capacity now, because we're paying off debts.
We have a big payoff in 2033.
So where does that, I'm just trying to help out for this to get it done.
If
We
y'all
don't-
said 40 million, just using that price as a max, the amount borrowed, because obviously 39.5 is close. If you did 40 million and you just stopped at that, even though you have additional capacity, you don't have to borrow it. So if you put 40 million on the referendum and the board wants to come back later because other projects come up, then you could tackle that at that time, and maybe that's the simplest thing to do.
I think we should advertise the amount of the projects that we want to fund, and I think that amount is 39,582,993. And
And that's going to be on both lines.
Okay.
Mrs. Chriscoe?
How is that still 2 cents? if I can do no sense, I mean, it just speeds up,
Right.
it,
Doesn't make any sense.
I don't see the correlation.
So you borrow more sooner.
Man, y'all are all into someone else's pocket. I get it. I understand now. Got it.
That's what we're doing, folks.
That's all it is. Voters can decide.
So let's go back to this resolution.
Why is Davenport so different? That's what I don't understand.
Because we've got new sheets of paper now, right? Different
Well,
numbers.
the first whereas is going to be the 39, the second, or number 3 is going to be the 39 also, or whatever, wherever the number Davenport comes up with Maria and with. Everything. Is that what we want to have prepared?
We're driving a car 90 miles an hour into a wall. That's what we're doing.
That's the figure I'll put in.
Any more discussion on this?
Can we have to or be provided prior to our next meeting? And it might be here. Give me 1 second. Let me just look. Okay, never mind. I got it. I see what I need to see.
Okay. Anything else on this topic?
Nope.
County attorney items. You're not happy to be here?
No, I am actually.
Do you think the real attorney would be happy to be here?
He wouldn't have us.
Board and commission reports. Supervisor discussion.
I have one item,
Mr. Bazzani.
I would like to know the history of the properties that were sold north and south of our county garage, as Mr. Records had identified. I'd like more information as to what they were sold for and why the assessment for that property can go up higher than the 2 adjacent properties next to them. I'm still puzzled by that.
Anything else? Okay. I need a motion for this, don't I? To continue to the 15th. Like a motion to continue this meeting until August 15th.
Mr. Chair, I move to remove this, continue this meeting until August the 15th.
Ms. Steele, will you poll the board?
Mr. Hedrick?
Yes.
Mr. Bazzani?
No.
Mr. Gibson?
Yes.
Dr. Orth? Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Hutson?
Yes.
Mr. Chriscoe?
No.
Motion carries.
Okay, we're in recess until the 15th.